Getting back to our stocks, after the price to earnings ratio, what's the next variable that comes to mind?
One thing that is very important is the number of shares in the market.
So you're saying if there's only 10 stocks in my company, when somebody buys a share,
That's
the share
10%.
prices just jump by
Yeah,
10%,
exactly.
which is extremely high, which is very volatile.
Yeah.
If somebody thinks the price is overvalued, they're going to sell it, and
Yep.
that's a 10% drop. Whereas if there's millions of shares, even if thousands of people decide to buy shares that specific time, my share will only jump by a cent or two, which is much more stable. The total volume of shares that the company has, multiply that by the price of a share, and you get how much the company is actually worth, which is called the market cap.
Exactly. Currently, I think the number one market cap company is Microsoft. They're worth like a 3 trillion.
Yeah. The highest market cap companies have been around 3 trillion for a while, for a few years at this point, right?
Actually, no. Well, I mean, as in not 3 trillion, right?
Okay.
I think Apple and Microsoft were fighting for the top position. But like 2 years ago, I think they just broke like 2 trillion. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, they broke
Sure.
like 1 trillion.
Yeah.
So they've been like,
It's been like
yeah.
when you think of $1 trillion, I don't even know what you can do with that money.
It's a crazy amount of money.
Can you buy like state?
It's more than some countries. It's crazy. Like, GDP
Yeah.
of certain countries is way less than that.
Wow. There's so many different things when it comes to buying a stock. I don't think you can just look at, oh, this company has high market cap, so I'll just buy it, or this company has high volume of shares, I'll just buy it.
And we're just talking about quantitative figures here
Yeah.
too, right? There's also things you can't put into numbers.
Yes, one thing you definitely want to, especially if you're following the stock, you want to trade, you want to be ready to buy or sell based on something. You want to follow the news of a company, right? Especially after earnings calls or company keynotes. If you look at it, the stock price changes a lot more than it usually does on a random day.
Yep.
Because the company is giving out information and news during earnings calls. They're literally saying how they did this quarter, how much money they made, how much money they lost, how many products they sold, whatever.
And what they're projecting into the future.
Right. Investors look at those numbers a lot and they invest, they buy or sell, and that changes the stock. So if you don't want to be in a volatile state, then you want to follow those company earnings. And as soon as one's done, if you think the company's doing great, just keep the stock. Even if the price goes down, just keep it because you believe in the company.
Exactly.
And if you think it's not going to do well, just sell it.
And
right?
there's certain things that also will affect the share price, even though their like actual earnings doesn't go down. For example, Facebook got so much hate after the election scandal a couple years ago. They're putting these ads that are targeting certain people and skewing the votes to the other side. But their ad revenue stayed the same. Their share price went down a lot, but their actual fundamentals were still there.
Right.
So people who knew that bought a lot of Facebook shares, and their stock went up so much after that.
Yeah.
Not just tech stocks too, but there's other stocks. I don't know, Boeing, right? There you hear a lot about on the news. Planes with losing their
planes just acting like roller coasters in the middle for a little bit, and then everything's back to normal.
But maybe you should look into the details, right? Are they actually selling less planes now? It's actually good to see just sentiment around the company too. There's this saying, be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful.
So
What else should people consider?
let's say you love a company, but the CEO is involved in a scandal. Do you want to sell those stocks? What would you do, John?
I think you have to separate your morals and the fundamentals of a company. If the company's moral mission is whatever the CEO wants, that's different. But if the CEO is caught up in a scandal and the board decides to fire them and you still believe in the company's mission, I think you should separate those two, right? Like, just like how you should separate the actor from his art,
Yeah.
you should also separate the CEO from the company, because the CEO is not the company, right? He's also just an employee of the company.
Yeah.
So
I think you said that really nicely. As much as, if the CEO is usually caught in a scandal, I think the stock prices do drop because people are very, I don't know, not confident. But I think the way you put it was great. So private companies also have their own stocks. And what that means is they just have private investors. They don't need to announce quarterly earnings to the public because they're a private company. They deal with all their endeavors inside the company, and that's pretty much it. They make products. If you wanted, you buy it as a consumer, but you cannot invest because it's a private company. But in a public traded company, you can just buy whatever stock. It's available in stock exchange, right? Second thing I want to talk about was, why would you actually invest in stocks when you can just have cash?
you don't want to just keep cash because of inflation. Inflation will always be there. Government wants inflation. Why? If there is no inflation, you would just keep your money and you wouldn't spend it, especially if there's like the opposite of inflation, deflation, right?
Deflation, yeah.
So that means that your money is worth more later on. But if you're not spending, that's someone else's income. So the economy doesn't move, right? And the government wants the economy to move. They want their GDP. They want to have jobs. They want to um, create like value, right? And trade with other nations. So that's why if you just hold on to cash, it gets devalued over time. And shares, depending on the company, you can dramatically grow your money, your value over time if you pick the right company to invest in.
Yes, but again, you would not put just because you don't want to keep cash doesn't mean you would put all your money into stocks, right? You also want cash because
To spend.
there are a bunch of stocks that for the most part are very
Stable.
stable, yeah, like S&P, like ETFs basically, S&P 500, Dow Jones. There's even certain companies, but anyways, the issue is if all your money is in stock markets, for example, like right when COVID hit, everything just plummets and suddenly, let's say you were worth $1 million, suddenly you're only worth $100,000 because all stocks plummeted. Yeah, they went up, but at that point you didn't know. So you want to keep some cash because when everything goes down, you don't want to sell at that time, right? You want to wait. You want some time to wait, be patient so that the stocks can go up, assuming you still believe in them.
And you also want cash so that when if the stocks do go down, that's a perfect opportunity to buy it.
Perfect opportunity to buy it, and also for your just normal everyday use, you have that cash.
survive.
You don't need to sell your assets to survive,
I mean,
which is a bad place to be at, I think.
Exactly. Typically, people should not invest money that they need to survive.
Yes.
Like, we're talking disposable income here, and you should live below what you're making. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, this is not the first thing you should do with your money.
Survivability is first. Keep cash for that, and then
Sustainability, yeah.
and then if you're, let's say you're taking 10, 20, 40% from your paycheck just to put into savings, then yeah, split that money, like do 10, 20% into savings and 10, 20% into stocks. Because if the stocks grow, that's great. They are higher risk, higher reward. They can go down. But that's why, invest in the stocks you believe in. And
Yeah, and also when you need the money is also very important. Let's say if I need the money next week, right? I wouldn't just go and buy this very volatile stock. They could go up 100%. They could also go down like 50%. Like, you never know. So if you're gonna need the cash within a certain time frame, that should also go into how much risk you're willing to take. One really good thing about this is if you want to lower your risk and you don't want to buy a specific stock, you can instead get an index fund. An index fund, for example, there's the S&P 500, which is like top 500 publicly traded companies that someone went and decided, and they made this tracker that they call this S&P 500. You can't just go and buy the S&P 500 index, but there's this ETF. ETF stands for Exchange Traded Funds, which will act like a stock. So you can go buy the share of this ETF. There's one called SPY, which is actually the first ETF that ever made, which will track this index fund.
Right.
So if you go buy one share of the SPY, and if the S&P 500, which is like the top 500 companies, if they all go up, then your share also goes up.
Yeah, that's basically stating that if the economy just keeps moving forward, going up, S&P 500 is always going to go up, and you're betting that the economy will go upward, right? You're not hoping your country goes into decline. So
Exactly.
yeah.
And there's other ETFs out there too, ETFs that track specifically the semiconductor stocks. Or
I know about this one called QQQ, which tracks the top 100 tech stocks.
there you go, right?
So if you believe in just the tech stocks, then get QQQ, right? Because I think if you invest in one stock, it's kind of like you're putting all your eggs in one basket. So if it breaks, it breaks. The company goes bankrupt.
And-
Suddenly you lost a lot of money.
Exactly.
So
Or
you want
like
to diversify. And when you say diversify, how much do you want to diversify again is a great question. Because do I want to diversify in this one industry like QQQ, which is just the tech stocks? Am I betting that the tech stocks will go up? Or do I want to believe in S&P 500, which talks about the top 500 companies regardless of which sector they're in? That's more diversified, which means it's lesser risk, but could potentially also be lesser reward.
multiple levels of diversified, right? Like what you talked about is like multiple sectors. You have tech and you have like other stuff like food or banking. Even within the tech stock, you could have competitors. Let's say, Apple releases a new product, like a new phone, and then suddenly Samsung stocks fall because like Samsung also sells phones too.
Right.
So overall, if you just buy the tech ETF, then maybe that'll just go up higher because everyone's buying more, spending more on tech stuff. Whereas if you just were to buy one tech stock, maybe a competitor will do something and then it's like very
Right.
volatile.
So you're saying that if Apple, let's say, releases a phone and Apple stock goes up because it's great, and Samsung's stock goes down because it's a competitor, you're saying if you bought the tech ETF, you're saying that one stock goes up, the other one goes down, so you're kind of stable. Like
Yeah, it's
you're,
it's much more stable because of that specific reason, right?
yeah,
This ETFs, index funds, they give you less risk, but you still get to get some of this profits that
yeah.
these companies make, and you
At
should.
that point, you're betting on people will buy more phones rather than
Well, I mean, that's one example.
something like that. Actually, I wanted to say one more thing about the S&P 500 as well, or any of these ETFs. At that they're not. If there's 500 companies, it doesn't mean all 500 companies are equal. In those top 500 companies, the top company has a high weightage. So it's maybe 4% of that ETF is going to be just the top one company. 3% or 2% going to be the second company, and it slowly goes down till the 500 companies probably 0.000 some percent. And the lowest companies, if they're not the top 500 anymore, they get kicked out and the new ones get added in.
The reason why I bring up index funds is because like we're talking about horizon of like when you need the money, that affects how much risk you're willing to take. And typically the general consensus is that like S&P 500 will net you 7% annual return
Right.
every year. That doesn't mean every year guaranteed 7%.
Yeah.
Some years could be
Negative.
20%, some
Yeah.
years could be negative too,
Yeah.
right? Minus 15%. And there were years like that.
Yeah.
But there are also years like in 2022, 2023, which was a lot, right? I think 2022 especially, there was a lot of return. 2021 was pretty bad. Every year is plus or minus something, but the average is usually 7%. So if you were to just put it in there, there's a specific time frame, I think maybe 20 years, you're always guaranteed a
Sure.
positive. If you're positive that you don't need the money for 20 years, go ahead and invest in an index fund. Even though there'll be multiple recessions probably between now and 20 years from now, it'll probably still go up 7% every year
Yeah, that makes sense.
on average.
We talked about ETFs. What about mutual funds? What are mutual funds and how are they different from ETFs?
Mutual funds is a broad category for what I understand. So there's two types of mutual funds. One is actively managed and there's a passive mutual fund. So passively managed mutual fund is what we talked about, index funds, S&P 500. But then there's actively managed mutual funds. Basically, that means that some banker somewhere, finance expert, goes and he or she picks what stock to invest in. And then they will try to beat the market being the index fund.
Yeah.
And for their expertise, you had to pay them a certain amount of money based on how much you gave them, right? So this is called expense ratio.
Right.
Typically, it's 0.1% for cheaper mutual funds, but it can go up pretty high. We're talking 1, 2, maybe even 3%.
Wow. Yeah, I was gonna say 0.1% sounds pretty okay.
Yeah, like it depends. Like 100% go see, because typically this is what your 401k is invested in. You can go see if you don't do anything, it's just some mutual fund, actively managed mutual fund with a really high expense ratio. Someone else, we don't know if he's doing a good job or not,
Yeah.
but they're pocketing the money that you give them.
Yeah.
Right?
'Cause even if they lose money in that mutual funds, they still get that
They
2,
still get it's not the
2%. So,
profits. It's
yeah.
it's just the total amount of money you
Yeah.
give them.
So
A
if you lost
commission.
2%, you just lost another 2%.
Yeah, it's a commission for nothing. So there are years where they do a good job, and there are years that they do a terrible job. But you should go see and see how good they're doing compared to how good the market is doing.
Yeah.
I think in general, better to go with the passive route.
There's so much more. If you guys are interested, we're happy to talk about it and enlighten you guys with this information.
That this podcast is only for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or other professional advice. So this is just us talking about investing.
Yeah. You've been listening to Soorya Ramesh.
And John Ravi,
You've been listening to Two Brown Accents.
we'll see you guys in the next